Well, amen. Beautiful, wonderful prayers, and thank you. That was great. Our Father loves us so incredibly far beyond what we fathom, and hopefully we'll see that in the Word tonight as well. But wonderful, wonderful words of comfort, and thank you. So tonight we're going to talk about the birth of Jesus a la REV. I credit my brother and his team for all of this work. All I did was read it and put it together, and hopefully in a way that will inspire you. It certainly has, as I've been studying this over the last several weeks, inspired me beyond words. And, you know, for those of us who came out of the way ministry background, or even a background of years with STF, the details surrounding Jesus' birth may not be new. But if anyone is out there in Zoom land who is new to our ministry, we welcome with all of our hearts. And I realize that some of the things that I might share tonight might be different, very different than traditions that you may have held dear or understood, certainly about the circumstances surrounding the birth of Jesus. And I just encourage you to open your heart to what is the real truth of the scripture. And to me, you know, I did not grow up in a Christian home. Had images of the Christmas story that were very traditionally based. And when I first learned the real truth, it just made so much more sense to me and made the birth of our Messiah so much more real and understandable. And I hope it does that for you as well. So we're in Luke 2 tonight, and whatever media you are using, whether it's a printed thing or your phone or your iPad or your computer, if you're in the REV, great. If you're not, that's great too, because I'll be kind of contrasting the translation of the REV with what we might be more familiar with, a very traditional translation, as we go through this wonderful, amazing record of the birth of our Messiah. So we'll start right out in verse 1. Now, it came to pass in those days. Well, what days are those? Well, Luke 1, if you were with us 2 or 3 weeks ago when I taught about the announcement of Mary's pregnancy, Elizabeth's pregnancy, Mary's trip to visit Elizabeth. She stayed there for 3 months, all of that, and then she went home. Those days. All right, so by now, Elizabeth has given birth to John the Baptist. Mary's back home in Nazareth and going through her pregnancy. So in those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus to register all the inhabited world for taxation. Now, what all the inhabited world? Well, think of Israel being part of the Roman Empire, Caesar Augustus ruling out of Rome, and honestly, the Roman Empire what was really considered to rule all the inhabited known world at that time. So, and it also gives you a sense of maybe the egocentricity or the extreme power that Rome had over Europe, Eastern Europe, Palestine, all of that area, and even far, far east into Mesopotamia, Parthia. I'm going to show you some maps in a little bit. But the first register, so anyway, register all the inhabited world for taxation. This first registration took place while Quirinius was governing Syria. And everyone went to be each to his own city. So the decree said you're going to go to your own city, to your city of origin, to be registered. Okay, now I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Bear with me. And we're going to a map. Let me know. Hopefully you can see that. Yes? Yeah? Is that a yes? Okay. So, oh, everybody's mute. Duh. Okay. So here is the province of Syria. What this map is, and let me see if I can add a tiny bit without losing what. Okay. The province of Syria, and this is, when you go to Israel, this is Syria today, just about. It's to the north and a little bit west of what is Israel in the current. And you see this area here where it says Kingdom of Herod, and then there's all these dotted lines. Herod had a huge kingdom, and he was extremely powerful, extremely ruthless, jealous, paranoid. It was not a good man. But he ruled a whole bunch of the provinces of Israel. And the point about queerness governing Syria, I think it's just a time and location marker to help us. So here's the Roman provinces of Syria, and then all these other provinces were part of the kingdom of Herod. Okay, now I'm going to stop and go back. Okay, so everyone went to be registered in his own city. And Joseph also went up from Galilee, Nazareth, into Judea, which was a Roman province. I'll go back to the map. To the city of David, that is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and family line of David. Now, let me go back. You know, no, all right. I think I have to go through this sharing bit, right? I can't just open it. Okay. So I'm going to zoom in. Hard. Okay, so here you can see Judea, and there's Jerusalem, and here is Bethlehem, about 7 miles south of Jerusalem. So Bethlehem was Joseph's city of origin. Joseph was of the line of David, we know this. So why in the verse it says, you know, Joseph went up from Galilee, but wait, where's Galilee? It's north. It's way up here. Here's Galilee, here's Nazareth. This is where Joseph and Mary were, and they traveled all the way down to here. Now, interestingly, when we looked at a couple weeks ago, we looked at the journey that Mary made when she first knew she was pregnant. It's essentially the same journey. She went from Nazareth, probably down through these I don't want to highlight, through trade routes, and then came down eventually to the area, the hill country around of Judea, which is where Elizabeth was from. This time they're actually going right to Bethlehem. So we know this is about a 70-mile journey. It's not something that you put together overnight. And we know that Joseph and Mary would not have made this journey alone. For a couple of reasons. One is because if you think everybody who was living in the area of Israel at the time who had been from Bethlehem was headed there. Okay, so Bethlehem is going to become a very crowded place pretty quick. In addition to that, the time frame of this, we believe, is in the fall, early September-ish, not in December as our tradition has it. So there would have been a lot of people on the roads, thankfully, because that would have made it a lot more safer. And why does it say, well, they went up when they actually went south? In our culture, the way we interpret a map, north is always up and south is always down, and we orient ourselves directly north and south. In the East, it wasn't like, in this culture, in the Eastern culture, it wasn't like that. Maps and directions were oriented east and west, like the rising of the sun, the setting of the sun, that kind of thing. Also, so why, but still, why do you Jerusalem? One, it was higher in elevation than where they were in Nazareth, and it was a holy place to worship. Okay, so that would be, you know, if you were going to Jerusalem at the time of the feast, everybody went up to Jerusalem because it was the holy place of worship. So anyway, for all those various reasons, Joseph went up from Nazareth to Judea, the Roman province of Judea, and of course his end destination was Bethlehem, because that's where he was from. And why is Bethlehem called the city of David? Because that's where David was from. But there's several times throughout Luke 2 that the Bethlehem is referred to not as Bethlehem, but as the city of David. Why? Because David was such a central figure in their culture. He was the great unifier of Israel. He was the greatest king that ever was in being able to unify the people. He was the psalmist. He was the man after God's own heart. He was just such a center of their culture. And so why is Bethlehem the city of David? Because he was born there, as was his dad, Jesse, and his grandfather, Obed, and his great-grandfather, Boaz, who married Ruth. And all of that generations came out of this beautiful city of David, or Bethlehem. And we're back in verse 4. So Joseph went up from Galilee to the city of Nazareth into Judea, to the city of David that is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and family line of David. And it's important to note that family lines in the East, in the ancient East, and even now in Israel, in Palestine, in Jordan, the Arab countries, family line is extremely important, and it's quite well known. So it would have been known to David, to people in Bethlehem, that Joseph was of the lineage of David. So he went to be registered in verse 5, along with Mary, who had been betrothed to him and was pregnant. And I'm going to go back to me so you can see what I'm talking. There we go. Okay. He went to be registered along with Mary, who had been betrothed to him and was pregnant. How far along was she? We don't know. And interestingly, it says had been betrothed to him. Now, by this time, Mary and Joseph were married. So why doesn't it say that? Because the emphasis is on the betrothal, because they hadn't consummated their marriage yet, for one thing. And it's also, that had been betrothed is past tense and past, which is very interesting. It's a cultural pointing to the fact that Mary didn't choose this situation. Her parents did, that she would be betrothed and then married to Joseph. So passive voice, and then past tense, because the betrothal was over. They were married, but their marriage had not been consummated, and yet she was pregnant. And it came to pass in verse 6, while they were there. in Bethlehem, in the city of David. So while they were there, the days were fulfilled for her to give birth. How long were they there? We don't know. How far along was she in her pregnancy? We don't know. So I want to talk for a second about what is the traditional picture? What do we see in the artwork? What do we see on Christmas cards? What do we hear in Christmas carols? What is it? Well, that Joseph and Mary arrived in Bethlehem alone, right? And that she's practically in labor, and that they're desperately seeking refuge and a comfortable place, and they get turned away because there's no room in the inn. We'll get there in a second. And they alone give birth to Jesus in a manger, which in our Western world, mangers are in barns and stables. And so then you have all this kind of being put together in a very traditional sense. Well, where did all that come from? I mean, there had to be a logical thing that all of this arose out of, and there was actually a document written in the 300s AD, and it was called the Proto-Evangelium of James. And I don't really know anything more about it than that, except that this is the document that gave us so much of our traditional pictures or depictions about the birth of Jesus. And think about 300 AD. Okay, when did archaeology become a science? 1800s, right? Mid to late 1800s. So not only had the writers of the translators of the King James Version and other versions into these areas, but the science of archaeology was not even in existence yet. So the field is kind of ripe for whatever traditions might arise. And that the concept of a barn and a stable is a very Western concept, meaning Europe and West. It's not at all an Eastern concept. So, okay, so there's all this, the scripture is amazingly concise. In verses 6 and 7, there's just not a lot of detail in there about the real circumstances, but we have all this implied detail through our traditions and whatever. So we, tradition has them arriving, it's night, it's cold, they're alone, there's no place to go, they get turned away, and they end up in this stable and give birth by themselves. Verse 7, she gave birth to her firstborn son and wrapped him in swaddling cloth and laid him in a manger, because there was no space for them in the guest room. Oh, this is a different translation. Typically, you would read this as what, there was no room at the inn, right? That's King James, certainly, and lots of. So, again, the traditional stuff from that one document in the 300s AD and so forth. So, well, how do we get from no room at the inn to no space in the guest room? Well, the word that is translated in the REV space is the Greek word topos, and that's what it means, a space, an area. That's it. It's a pretty general term. And then the word that's translated guest room is kataluma, and it means a place to sleep. It does not mean a commercial inn, hotel, motel, lodging place, any of that. That's a whole different Greek word. Like in the parable of the Good Samaritan, where the Good Samaritan provided a place in the inn, totally different Greek word. This is actually it's just a word that means a sleeping place. So she gave birth and laid him in a manger because there was no place in the guest room. Now, let's talk a minute about what we can understand from this very, very concise verse, which really doesn't give us a whole lot of detail about the bigger picture. Why wasn't it a stable? Well, for one thing, and this is a plug for traveling to Israel on one of John's tours. It's a shameless plug. But there's so much value in being there. And Mina, Kathy, Karen, those of you who Michelle, those of you who are here who have been there, feel free to unmute and chime in. There is so much to be gained from just seeing this area and this setting and understanding and being able, it just changes the way you understand and take in the beauty of the scripture. So in Israel, one of the things you notice right away is that there are no stables. There are no barns. I mean, especially in the villages, and we'll see in a minute, where people in the villages, when you had maybe a goat or two or a sheep, maybe even a donkey, you brought them into your home at night. There weren't any outbuildings. When we got way out in the country, in the hill country, we kind of saw these very crude, like lean-to-ish sheds and things like that. But where they were maybe a larger herd of sheep or donkeys or whatever, but nothing like what we would consider in America a barn. Or a stable. I mean, they're just not there. Another thing, another detail is that family line and family history, as I said before, Joseph being of the line of David, in fact, Mary was as well, would have been well known and recognized. And because hospitality was such a huge centerpiece of the Eastern culture, it would have been unconscionable to turn them away from a home, much less an inn, had they looked at one, as a possibility, but they didn't. People would have bent over backwards to take them in. Another point, and John writes about this in his commentary, that when the shepherds came, if they had found Mary and Joseph alone in a lean-to or a shed, they would have been horrified and so offended by the breach of what was acceptable and loving and expected in their culture, that they would have taken them home. They would have gathered them up and, taken them home. It just wouldn't have ever happened for them to be alone by themselves in a stable. So if they weren't in a stable, then where were they? Again, the verse is so concise. It just gives us so little detail. Well, so where do you figure out where they were is by understanding customs and reading customs and so forth. So what would a birth have been like at the time of Mary and Joseph going to Bethlehem? Well, first of all, the woman giving birth would have been surrounded by midwives, family, friends, relatives of all kinds. Birth was risky. It was risky to the baby. It was risky to the mother. So there would have been a lot of support and assistance. And the women close to Mary in her life would have been all over that. Then they would have been in a home where they would have that comfort and that connection. Now, so what's going on? Though in Bethlehem, it's crowded. It's really full, and not only because of the registration that Caesar Augustus decreed, but because this was very likely during the time of the Feast of Tabernacles. So people would have been flooding into Jerusalem. Bethlehem was only 7 miles away. If people didn't have a place to stay in Jerusalem, they would have stayed in Bethlehem. It would have been a couple hours walk, maybe 3 hours walk to get back up to Jerusalem to go to temple and stuff like that. So there would have been a lot in Bethlehem. So here come Mary and Joseph, and they're undoubtedly taken in by some relative, but oops, the house is really full. Well, what's that house like? I mean, there's no room in the guest room. What's a guest room in a house in that day and time? When we were in Israel this past summer and we went to, the city of Taipei, we went to a place, it was actually in part of a churchyard called the Bible House or Biblical House, and it was a replica of what a home would have looked like at exactly this time. So I'm going to do my best to describe it to you. I asked John if by any chance he had pictures, and apparently we can pray for this. Apparently something has happened to the stick or thumb drive or SIM card or whatever was in his camera, and he may have lost them all. But anyway, so this house, and again, you guys that have been there, feel free to unmute and chime in if you want to add a detail or whatever. But so a smallish dwelling that I would say what total was about 1.5 stories, top to bottom. Okay, you walk in a door, and most of the men in the trip had to crouch to get through this door. And you step into a very narrow hallway. And immediately on the left is a low room where the floor of the room is dug down below where you're standing, not too far below, but a few feet. And the ceiling is very low. And that was the room where the manger would have been, that they would have brought their animals in at night. Why? To protect them, to keep them warm. They came right into the home. So that's that room. Then if you step a couple more steps down the hall, not far, because it's not a huge, huge space, then there's a stairway on the left that went up like maybe 3 or 4 steps. So it's like a half a flight, even if that. And there's a big open, well, big, relatively speaking, maybe 10 by 10-ish, that would have served as kitchen, living room, and sleeping quarters for the family. And off of that, there was this other small area on the same level that was a little more private, that would have been the guest room, where they would have taken in guests. So here, Mary and Joseph, they arrive in Bethlehem, they connect with relatives, they get taken in, the guest room is full. Come into our family living quarters. And that's what we believe had occurred. And that's where she gave birth.
And had a manger. We saw manger in there.
Yes. And Mina, was the manger in the low room where the animal, or had it been brought up into the family living quarters?
Yeah.
It was in the family living quarters? Right. So the manger is simply, it's something they would have cleaned out. It's perfect size for a newborn. And they would have cleaned that out and provided that to Mary as a place to have her baby rest out of her arms. So that is kind of what is behind this translation about having no room in the guest room.
Would it be something like this?
Say again?
Would it be something like this?
I can't see. Oh, much, much smaller. Way, 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 way smaller.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's about 1.5 stories.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking.
The guest room kind of reminded me almost like, if you like if you had a kid's bunk bed or something like that, that you really, it wasn't real tall, and that, you could fit a mattress in there theoretically, not that there was one, but, there was enough space for that, but there wasn't much more than that. I mean, I would imagine that the guests would all curl up and sleep in there, but I doubt if they spent a whole lot of time beyond that. They probably stayed with their hosts most of the time.
I agree. I totally agree. And remember that they didn't sleep on beds. And when they traveled, they carried with them their blankets and all of this stuff, like bedrolls, right? So you would go into that guest room and lay out your bedroll. But right, it wasn't like any kind of a separate quarters. It's very close. way closer than anything like we would tolerate in our culture.
Here's another picture.
Okay, let me see. That's getting closer. That's definitely getting closer to what it is. The thing is very simple, very crude. I think, and Michelle, you can comment on this. I remember a central fireplace and kind of a hole up through the ceiling so the smoke would go out, and yeah.
Tags on the wall, to hang things on, and
Here's another picture.
not a whole lot of, yeah, that's a great picture, Liz.
It's kind of hard for, yeah, good. Yep. So here we are. I mean, we're getting all of this. You might look at this and say, wow, that's a lot of interpolation of detail, right? Because, I mean, one of the marvels to me about this section of scripture is how little it says. It just is so matter of fact that it's the Messiah. She gave birth to her firstborn son and wrapped him in swaddling cloth, which means he was salted. He was washed, salted, and dedicated, and then laid him in a manger because there was no space for them in the guest room. Not a lot of detail. So, a real honest question is, well, how do you know all that? How do you know all this about the family and being invited into a home and all of that? Well, and if those of you who go all the way back to like the Power for Abundant Living class and whatever, remember the keys to biblical interpretation. And I think I would add what I'm about to say to the list of keys to biblical interpretation. And this is really, it's quite central to why so many topics in the scriptures are not plain to us, is that when something was so culturally plain to them, the writers didn't feel the need to belabor it. Here's an example of that. If I say to you, hey, Dave and I are flying to Omaha for Christmas. Okay, we're not, we're driving, but anyway, if I said we're flying to Omaha for Christmas, and what you might get images immediately of, oh my God, crowded airport, long security lines, huge mob at the gate, oh, sick people on the airplane. I mean, whatever might come up in your mind, but you have a whole repertoire of visualization based on your own experience and common knowledge when I say, yeah, we're flying to Omaha. So that what I don't have to tell you is, well, really, we're getting in our car with all of our luggage and we're driving to this huge, gigantic building with a parking lot, and we're going to drag our luggage out of the car and we're going to go into this building and we're going to stand in all these long lines. And we're going to kind of get x-rayed and we're going to send our luggage on a belt. And then huge corridor. I mean, I don't have to say all that. It's because you know it. And that's the same thing as what's going on here. And it's very common through scripture. So when we read not only this record, but many, many records, we have to think, what did they know and understand in their time? And it just, the way a birth happened is the way it happened. I mean, all the women would have been inside supporting Mary, the midwives doing their thing. The men would have been outside. They, not even present. Joseph, not even present. He would have been outside with his friends and family, and they would have been waiting for the announcement of the birth, the gender of the child, really, and obviously the health. And then there would have been this huge, gigantic celebration when that announcement came. So anyway, you get the why the detail is missing. It doesn't mean it's not valid, and thankful to the archaeologists who have, and those of us who have been to Israel and walked through some of these archaeological sites can have an appreciation for the tedium of an archaeological dig and what it is to, take a little tiny paintbrush and scrape off pieces of pottery to glean knowledge of what life was really like. And it's, to their hard work and understanding that we owe our ability to understand what's really hidden behind a verse like Luke 2:7. So then moving on, in Luke 2:8, there were shepherds in the same area, living out in the fields and keeping watch over their flock at night. And this is really important. And again, understanding Israel. This verse is what really strongly points to the time of the year, because the shepherds were in the fields during the dry season from mid-April-ish to mid-October-ish. And it was the warm season and the dry season. And then when you get to mid-October, it starts to get cold and rainy in Israel, and it really rains well into the spring. And so honestly, the shepherds are just not out in the fields in December. It's too cold, and it's too rainy. But they were out in the fields, living in the fields and keeping watch over their flocks at night. And if you the hill country, Bethlehem is built on the side of a hill and kind of up, like capping the top and then down the side. And it's a dense village. And then below Bethlehem, if you were to stand at the southern perimeter of Bethlehem and look out over these fields, they would be wide open, rolling, and not forested. So we're not talking like Smoky Mountains kind of rolling hills, okay? We're talking about barren landscape. The vegetation at this time of year would have been really scruffy, like low grasses and scruffy shrubbery, not lush and green. Like it would be more that way in April. This is September, the tail end of the dry season. It's really quite arid, but wide open. So think of a huge, gigantic sky and this rolling countryside outside of Bethlehem. And in verse 9, the angel of the Lord stood before them. So all of a sudden, there's this extra guy in the fields. And the way I picture this, like, okay, there wouldn't be just one shepherd and a handful of vast rolling hills. There would be several herds, maybe lots of herds of sheep, and a bigger herd of sheep had a shepherd and several assistants. So there might be, if you picture them sprinkled over this vast hillside. So here's a flock and a group of people, and here's a flock and a group of people, and here's a flock, and all of a sudden there's this person, extra person standing, not hovering, fluttering wings, but standing before them, and the glory of the Lord shone round them, and they were frightened with great fear. No kidding. You go from this wide open black sky, but clear with beautiful stars and all of this, like, and they're kind of sprinkled around the hillside. And all of a sudden there's this big man there and think stadium lights, Think of like being on a ballpark when the lights go on. That's what happened. That's what it was like. I would have hit the dirt. I imagine, yeah, they were frightened with great fear. And the angel said to them, "Don't be afraid, for look, I bring you good news that will cause great joy, which will be for all the people." And of course, initially Israel, and then by extension, the whole world, you and me as Gentiles, outsiders at that. And he goes on, the angel goes on, "For to you was born this day in the city of David the Savior, who is the Messiah and Lord." What an announcement. And we know that these shepherds were believers because of what they said later on. So here's this amazing scene. I mean, this stranger shows up, he's standing among them, he makes this incredible announcement, the Shekinah glory lights the sky, like, you know, God is announcing my son has finally arrived. I just, this is becoming my absolute favorite part of the whole birth story. And then suddenly, oh, and this will be a sign for you. You will find a baby wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger. In other words, go see him, like right now. And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of the heavenly army, praising God and saying, "Glory in the highest, heavens to God, and on earth peace among people with whom he is well pleased." Now let's visualize this a minute. So this one stranger instantly shows up in the hillside and makes this announcement. The sky lights up like a stadium, and then there's a multitude of people standing all of the hillsides, like covered. I mean, to me, so that's what the host is. I mean, we don't use that word anymore, you know, the heavenly host. And the host is, you know, it could be an army. It's used in that way. But I think, you know, that's why they chose a multitude of heavenly army, praising God and saying, "Glory in the highest heavens." Why is this so precious to me? We all know that Ephesians and lots of other places in the scripture talk about a spiritual battle that has been ongoing since Genesis, right? These are the guys. These are the guys who ensured that Israel would continue. These are the guys that ensured that the Christ line would continue. And they got to be there at this incredible announcement and be part of this praising God and glorifying God. And to me, I don't know, when I, you know, lay awake at night and I know I can speak in tongues, I feel that I am in some way connected with and supporting this. I mean, we speak of tongues of men and of angels, right? That I'm a part, I take part in this. But they took part in it on that night, and how cool is it that they got to be there, to stand in that countryside with those shepherds and to be part of this incredible announcement. And you know, I had an interesting conversation with John about this stadium lighting idea. You know, the Shekinah glory, so bright. It says when Moses came down from the mountain, his face was so bright people couldn't look at him, right? It's just so bright. And I said, well, you know, Bethlehem being up higher than this, why wouldn't all of Bethlehem have seen this? Maybe even as far as Jerusalem. And he said, yeah, you know, we talked about it for a little bit. The fact of the matter is we just don't know. was it just visible to those shepherds in that local area? It could have been. And there were instances, you know, when Moses was on the mountain and the glory of God was there, that the brightness of God was in the center and shrouded by a dark perimeter, so that its visibility was confined to the area that God wanted it. We don't know. We have no idea. It's just such a, you know, if they saw it in Jerusalem, praise God. If the shepherds were the only ones that saw it, well, you know, how wonderful is that for them? So we just don't know, but it was bright. It was really, really bright. And, you know, I just think that through the Christ line and through the history of Israel, there had been 4,000 years-ish, right, of waiting and watching, and Romans groaning and travailing together, the whole creation, and until this moment. And here's this incredible announcement. And just an interesting take on verse 14, you know, glory in the highest heavens to God. The heavens aren't plural, there aren't more than one, there's one. But it's an allusion to the vastness of it, and to the fact that in the hierarchy of heavenly beings, they were all there, top to bottom, just there to celebrate this moment. And on earth peace among people with whom he is well pleased. And what's the King James is on earth peace, goodwill to men, right? And we know and we understand that Jesus even himself said he doesn't come to bring peace. He came to give people choices, difficult choices, but that the peace which passes understanding is for us who choose him. And that's why the translation that the SPF guys chose here. So then it came to, sorry, one second. So it came to pass then when the angels left, I don't know how long they hung around, but you know, they were gone, and the shepherds said to one another, let's go straight to Bethlehem, and see this thing that has happened, which the Lord has made known. And they went with haste, and they found Mary and Joseph and the baby lying in a manger. So how did they find him? Because there was a big party going on outside of that house, because there'd been this wonderful announcement. The men were all outside, and the announcement comes out of the house that it's a boy, and everybody's healthy, and the party starts. So the women inside, they're cleaning up Mary, cleaning up the baby, getting ready for this huge celebration. People bringing food, oh my gosh. So it wasn't hard for the shepherd to find the place where this huge celebration and loud noise and music and all that was going on. And then they went inside and they saw the baby, and they told everything that they had seen out in the fields. And Mary treasured up all these things in her heart. And the shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all the things they had heard and seen. Everything was just as it had been spoken to them. No kidding. So I know it's 8:30, but if you can hang with me 10 more minutes, I wanted to go to Matthew. Are we good? It'll be quick, I promise you. So Matthew 2. So speaking of the traditional scene about the birth, who's missing so far? The Magi. No three kings in the barn that wasn't there. You know, so where are they? What happened to the Magi, and how did they ever enter the scene anyway? I'm going to move through this kind of quickly because I know we're running short of time. But anyway, after Jesus, verse 1 in Matthew 2, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, look, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? We have seen his star in its rising and have come to pay homage to him." Who are these Magi? They're not kings and they're not magicians, but they are a very specified religious sect, group of believers that actually went all the way back to the time of Daniel, when Daniel was carried away into captivity in Babylon as a child and then grew up in Babylon. King Nebuchadnezzar, ultimately, after he survived the lion's den and all that, had made Daniel king over this certain sect of astronomers, actually. And Daniel taught them the prophecies, the truths of the Old Testament, taught them how to watch the heavens. And so what they saw wasn't one big bright star that happened to travel ahead of them as they came across on their journey, but what they saw was a whole series of celestial events, planetary conjunctions, formations of relations of planets in constellations and so forth, and watched this over a period of time and concluded that this was it. This was the indication of the birth of the Messiah that they had been waiting for, because Daniel had taught their ancestors. And I'm going to just one more time real quick share another file. Wait, where did it go? Oh, okay, forget it. I'm sorry, I'm not finding it. I have it open, but I'm not seeing it. But anyway, what I wanted to show you was where they were. If you can picture, if you have an Oxford Bible Atlas, where Mesopotamia was and where Abraham came from, Ur of the Chaldees, way back thousands of years earlier, and all the way up and around the Fertile Crescent to the area of Israel. That is the journey that the exact same journey that Abraham made, actually, because they would have followed the same trade routes, the same water routes and everything. It's about 500 miles. And in that time, they would have traveled in a large caravan because of the dangers, and they were wealthy, and they brought very expensive gifts, valuable gifts with them. So they would have traveled in a fairly substantial crowd. And they didn't know where they were going other than where the Jews lived, which is why they ended up in Jerusalem. They went there because that's where the Jews are from, and he was king of the Jews. So they end up in Jerusalem and ask around, where is this king? Well, Herod got wind of that and was deeply disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. Well, Herod was disturbed because, wait a minute, a competition on the scene. And Herod, as I said before, he was ruthless, he was evil, he was jealous, he was paranoid. The saying in the time of Herod was, "I'd rather be his pig than a relative." Because Herod was posing as a Jew, he never would have touched a pig. But he killed his relatives on a regular basis. He murdered sons, he murdered wives. I mean, he was just any inkling of any competition, and he was, out to eliminate it. So, and he was disturbed. And why would all of Jerusalem be disturbed? Well, again, shameless plug for going to Israel, but when you can walk the old city of Jerusalem, you can walk that perimeter and even wind in and out of the streets and stuff in an afternoon and really cover the area. So it's small. So a big wealthy entourage of foreigners shows up, and they have to come through one of the gates, because it's a walled, gated city, so they're going to come through one of the gates. There were watchmen at the gate, so word would have gotten out pretty quickly. Whoa, who are these people? Why are they here? What are they doing? Da 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 da. So that of Jerusalem was disturbed. And then, so Herod gathers together all the high priests and the experts of the law and wants them to figure out from the ancient writings and so forth where the Christ was to be born. And they came up with this verse from Micah that revealed, well, it's out of Bethlehem that the child is going to come. And that's verse 6. And then Herod, once he learned, secretly called the Magi and found out the exact chronology of the appearing of the star. Secretly called the Magi because he's cooking up a plot, right, to eliminate this competition and doesn't want it known publicly. And the exact chronology, how long have you been on the road? When did you see these celestial events? All this kind of inquiry. I mean, for them to have traveled 500 miles, it's got to be at least like almost 3 months, I would think, at roughly 10 miles a day. And that would be pretty fast for a large caravan. So it was not an insignificant trip. So anyway, then he says to them, oh, go search diligently and send word to me when you find him that I can come and worship him also. And after listening to the king, they went on their way. And look, the star that they had seen in its rising was going before them until it came and stood over where the child was. And this is a beautifully astronomically put together verse. It's the terms in here, the star that stood is a term. It's an astronomical term for when a celestial element reaches the zenith point. So what was really going on here? I mean, we know the song, following yonder star and all that. It wasn't that at all. What the caravan, when they left Jerusalem to go to Bethlehem, which would have been like a 3-hour journey, probably. They would have gone before daylight to get a head start. So the stars would have been visible. And what they saw was the planet Jupiter rising in the east in the dark and in the southern sky, because they're heading south out of Jerusalem to Bethlehem. So Jupiter rising in the southern sky and reaching its zenith right over the dead direction they were heading, which would have been toward Bethlehem. They already knew they were going to Bethlehem. They learned that from the experts in the law. It wasn't the star that showed them where Bethlehem was. It was the experts that said Bethlehem, and then they start walking. And so then here's this beautiful planet Jupiter that just gives them this most amazing, comforting confirmation. And when you're walking somewhere for 3 months, there's a lot that can be in question, right? There are a lot of uncertainties on a journey like that. Imagine how this felt to them. They're like, oh my gosh, there's the same Jupiter, which was part of all the whole stellar and planetary constellations that they'd been watching that announced the birth. And here was this amazing confirmation. And it came and it stood in its zenith over where the child were, and seeing this star, they rejoiced with exceeding great joy. And coming into the house, how'd they know? They asked, where's this family that had a baby about 18 months ago that, and there were so miraculous events around the birth that people would have gone, oh yeah, that's Mary and Joseph, and they're over there. So they came into the house and saw the child, Paidon, toddler, young child, not baby, not infant, but young child. And the scholars tend to think this is about 18 months after the birth. And falling down, they paid homage to him, and having opened their treasures, offered to him gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And that's where we get the 3 kings. because there were 3 gifts, but there weren't 3 kings. There weren't any kings. There were the Magi, and there was probably quite a group of them, and they brought an abundance of gifts that actually financed Jesus' education and his training. So, and then of course the Magi were warned in a dream not to go back to Jerusalem where they would encounter Herod, so they went home by another road. Joseph had a dream, get out, take the child to Egypt, which he did, which would have been really, it sounds like a horribly far distance. It really wasn't. That it was just basically get out into the Sinai area outside of Roman jurisdiction, outside of Herod's jurisdiction. And then Herod issued the decree 2 years and younger in the whole area of Bethlehem and surrounding. So what an incredible, and again, angels fighting, warring in the heavens to protect the Messiah and the young family. So I appreciate your patience for letting me, go a little longer than normal, but it really is an incredible story, and it's an incredible time of year to kind of immerse ourselves in the whole details of it. So anybody have anything to share, add?
Well, it's a beautiful, you draw a beautiful picture of, again and again. Really, it's a beautiful presentation. What a good time to have that vision.
Thank you, Sue. That was an excellent teaching. And I had never put it together how speaking in tongues and the angels, the tongues of angels are men. And I just started tearing up. It's like, it's so incredible. It is just so, that's beautiful. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Well, I think about the verse, we know not what we should pray for as we ought. And I mean, there's times when I just at a loss. What do I pray for? I just know if I start speaking in tongues, it's going to be good. It's going to work, yeah.
I loved how you pieced together the part about how these angels would have been, in the battle, in the fight, protecting the Christ line and all of this. And then here was their moment to see that it mattered, that, that they were actually, that their efforts resulted in the goal being, met, and that, what great rejoicing that is. And I think about, wow, those same angels are probably fighting battles today, and there's so many people, and that, they must be spread, pretty thin. I mean, I can understand how, that probably, alters the dynamic as far as, what's going on. It just, caused me to think about it. And they have, they still have things to protect because, the return is going to be coming, and God wants everyone to be born again. And, how do you orchestrate that, trying to give everyone that has a chance, a real chance at believing.
Absolutely. And this, it relates totally to what the whole Ephesians theme, right, for the year. I mean, Ephesians 6, we're in it,
And that spiritual battle, when you describe those, to feel full of angels, the people, that special moment. And then they were just praising God. I had a picture of, wow, the moment when you're saying that, I had a picture of that thousands of years they've been fought and fought and fought for watching over that Christ line. And he's finally there. They just, they're just celebrating, I have that picture. And they are fighting with the risen Lord now. For watching over us, and
yes.
that, God's will be done on earth. That's so powerful.
Sue, I have a question regarding the Zoroastrian, the kings,
Mhm.
the Magi.
Yeah.
Do we know where they left from? Do we know approximately where they actually left from?
Not exactly, and I wish I could get back to that. Hold on. Now, can you see that map now, or do I have to screen share for you to see it?
I think we have to. I'm on my phone, so I don't see it.
Okay, hang on a second. Let me just screen share because I can show you this on the map, and it's pretty cool. Share. Okay, now can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay, so look, here is Jerusalem, right? Can you see my little star
Yes.
cursor thing? So Bethlehem is 7 miles on this map, like a milli-digit, south of Jerusalem. The Magi came from, we think somewhere, they were in the Parthian Empire. Okay, now Daniel was here in Babylon.
Wait, you're pointing out something right now?
Yeah. I know, I don't know how to change that, but so anyway.
Okay, I see it.
Babylon's over here. Think of Abraham came from way down here, like Ur of the Chaldees. It was way down here, almost off the map. And I apologize, I just scanned this at work. This is my Oxford Bible Atlas, and it's kind of. But so if the Magi, they were somewhere here, right? Somewhere in the Parthian Empire, probably fairly close to Babylon. They traveled like this, up and around on the trade routes all the way down to here. And by the scale of miles on this map, I think an inch is about 200 miles. They 500 miles, maybe even more.
Okay.
And that would have been in that area, if we scoop from here up and around and down into Israel, that is the Fertile Crescent. If you remember that from like 5th grade social studies,
Right.
whatever. But that was where water was. So they wouldn't have traveled straight across the Arabian desert because they would have had no water.
Right. Now, where would there have been war? I know that John has taught that they traveled over a region that was likely at war or had been at war for some time. Are you familiar with that?
Well, I'm not sure, Michelle. I know that are you familiar with the term Pax Romana? I mean, there was an unprecedented 200 years of peace at the peak of the Roman Empire. And so I think this is what I would speculate. I mean, I don't know exactly what John was talking about, but within the Roman Empire, there would have been constant like minor uprisings and skirmishes. And this is why Herod was so ruthless and so tyrannical, and he was politically cagey as well. He did not want any kind of uprising. They didn't want any unrest. That's why at the end of Jesus' life, when the Jews wanted rid of him, they accused him of causing unrest and dissension and uprisings in the area. No Roman ruler wanted that.
Right.
But so
Okay.
other than that, there might have been perimeter wars because the Romans were expansive.
I think his comment, this is Shara, it's not Michelle, but I think his comment was that when they traveled from the Parthian region, that they had to go through an area at war at the time. So possibly that was the route that somewhere along the route that you were showing.
It might
There's
have
a lot of
been,
those areas where it was.
it might have been up and around here, like just before they started to head west, because these gray dotted lines are Roman perimeters. So it might have been like just right outside or even on some of
Or
those.
right along the border.
That there would have been challenges to the Roman expansion by the indigenous peoples.
Right. Maybe that's what he was referring to. And he said that, I believe he said that that's why the caravan of the Magi would have been probably a lot larger than what we imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, not 3, or 12, but maybe you know, a couple hundred even.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. And through the whole journey, you know, there would have been people joining in and people peeling off, depending on where they needed to go. Right. So it would have been a group that might have changed kind of throughout the trip. But
Right. They would have had a lot of supplies and enough to last them probably 6 months or more going back.
Yeah. Yeah. Because, you know, after they saw the baby, they had to get home.
Right.
Yeah. So they had a lot with them. A lot.
Right.
Yeah. So, you know, entering the gates of Jerusalem, you can picture that would have really.
Right.
Wow. Look who's coming to town. I mean, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it must have been quite a stir.
Yeah. I'm going to stop sharing.
Great teaching, Susan. Great. I enjoyed it tremendously.
Well, thank you. Thanks. The privilege to do it. Anybody else?
Yes, thank you so much. You're very, very gifted in, how can I say this, painting the picture of actually being there. That's what you do for me, especially that's what you did for me tonight. And my, above all, favorite part of the whole teaching was the shepherds on the hill and all the angels and the armies showing up, participating in the announcement. I mean, my mind went to all kinds of places because of your artistic ability to visualize, you know, to some extent what it must have been like. And it took me to a place in my mind where I don't know if what I'm going to say is verifiable or true, but it is interesting to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Was the devil and his host there also witnessing this? And if so, what was happening to them? And because this host of army was there, you know, and this was the big announcement that God had been waiting for all these centuries, right?
Yeah.
Must have been extremely intense for one thing. And they didn't prevent it either. If they were there and if they did see it, they weren't able to prevent it, which made it even more intense. Something to think about.
Yeah. That's great. That's just great.
Herod was the devil's agent.
Did
Right,
you,
right.
Dave? Yeah. But
And
not.
the fact that, you know, this is his world. So here comes God with this announcement into this world, his property, right? And just takes charge and says, here it is, bam.
Yeah.
And because we know that he has so much regret for killing the Messiah, you know, it's so intense and so deep.
Yeah.
I mean, it had to be pretty heavy duty.
Yeah.
His plotting began right at that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what? Here's something else. I didn't really bring this up because it does kind of, it conjures up a question about, I loved it, Gary, what you said about, all right, you know, I don't know, but it's an interesting thought. You know, what was he thinking? Where was he? Well, what John and I were talking about was this, the glory of the Lord, the Shekinah glory, when it appears, God is in the center of it.
Yeah. Well, you know, another thing that got me thinking about this too is that John did a teaching some time back where the devil is in heaven, and you know, God and his angels have to deal with him on a regular basis. So, you know, the way teaching kind of covered that whole perception up. Where, because how can darkness be in the presence of light, for example, you know, or how can sin be in the presence of righteousness? But that's not necessarily true according to what John taught, and I believe what John taught was accurate and made a lot of sense. And if that's the case, then it makes sense to me that they could have been there and witnessed all that and seen that. So that's what led me to that conclusion, was that possibility.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
But
I thought it was interesting to think about how, just with what you said, that within the Shekinah glory, God is in the middle. And then you think about the messianic name Emmanuel, God with us. I mean, literally.
Yeah.
yeah.
In a Trinitarian perspective.
Mhm. Yeah. Hmm.
Well, that was beautiful. I'm gonna leave the meeting. Everyone have wonderful Christmas. Thank you, Sue. That was beautiful.
You're very welcome. Merry Christmas to
Merry
everybody.
Christmas, everyone. God bless.
Blessings,
God
everyone.
bless you.